Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Academy webinar. For those who are joining us for the very first time, my name is Alina Bonadonna, and I'm super delighted to be your moderator today. And today we have the distinct pleasure of hosting Chris Elliott, who is a professor of food safety and microbiology. Hello, Chris, how are you?
I'm very good, Alina, and many thanks for the invitation to present to the Academy today.
Thank you so much for joining. And I did have a pleasure to meet you in person in Madrid, actually a couple of days ago during Future Summit, but I didn't have enough pleasure to have a chat with you. So I will be also like other guys who are listening us online also will have another extra joy to get the best knowledge out of you. Before we begin, just a quick question to everyone. Definitely, you know what I'm gonna ask. Just drop a reaction here, please. If you hear as well, see as well, and Chris will be able to see it after he finished his presentation because right now it's a presentation all over his screen and he cannot see your hearts. But please keep it until the end and shoot it out as much as you can to grant him the gratefulness. So I see everyone is ready. And Chris, if you are ready,
I'm ready, thank you.
perfect. Then stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Alina. So it's a very warm welcome from me to you. I might be saying good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I know it's a very, very international audience for the Academy, and it is a great pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you. And when I was discussing with Alina what might be a nice topic, I thought, why not talk a bit about the fourth industrial revolution? I've been doing a lot of work on this for quite a long period of time. And I think what I want to do is maybe I'll first of all introduce myself to you a little bit. Some people know me as Professor Horsemeat. That's because I undertook the uh, independent review of the UK food system after the horse meat scandal in the UK. And that took me 1.5 years, something that I plan never to repeat again. I also am very proud to be the founder of what's called the Institute for Global Food Security. That's based at Queen's University, Belfast. And now that institute is ranked #1 in the UK for agriculture, food veterinary sciences, and also very well recognized internationally for a lot of its research efforts. I'm trying to repeat that in Southeast Asia at the moment, where we're setting up the International Joint Research Centre in Food Security. That's headquartered in Bangkok, but really working for the whole Southeast Asia region. I do a lot of work with various UN agencies, particularly in the area of food safety and food authenticity for World Food Programme, UNIDO, IAEA, and particularly working in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. But today, it's me. This is Chris Elliott. I asked ChatGPT to produce a picture of me based on all the information you had. So doesn't it show you how good artificial intelligence is? And what I've been doing very recently, taking a lot of the research that I've conducted over many different years on different topics about safety and authenticity, and we formed our own company called Be Analytical, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But I guess when you talk about food safety, we have to start with, I think, probably the most important, but also the most worrying data produced by the World Health Organization. Nearly 500,000 deaths each year, 1 in 10 people across the world falling ill. It's really very difficult statistics. And the WHO actually in November of this year will publish an update of this data. And I do fear that it will be worse in terms of the massive challenges that the planet has faced and is facing around many issues about foodborne illness. And recently, I've been doing a number of, we call them thought leader academies for people from the industry, the UK food industry. And I was asked to identify what really are the big challenges in the future for the food industry in terms of what's happening nationally, but also internationally. And what I came up with, I call it the Sinister Seven, those seven characters. And what are the Sinister Seven? Well, these are the things that have really identified that are causing massive changes and problems that are driving issues around fraud and food safety. And it is the tariffs are changing, massive disruptions to supply chains. We've got labour issues, changes in regulations, lots of issues about cybercrime and theft. So there are a lot of things actually to worry about. And why are all of these things changing and changing so dramatically? And I talk about the four big drivers of change to the global food supply system: our changing climate, the wars that are happening across the world, deglobalization, and also geopolitics. And I'm just going to walk through those a little bit. So I guess we're all, unless Donald Trump decided to join the webinar, I think we all agree our climate is changing and changing very dramatically. And a lot of it is actually about water. Too much water in some parts of the world, so too little water in other parts of the world. And that is really driving a lot of issues, particularly around crop failure, increased amount of disease, which in turn will bring about massive food safety issues. This is the global price tracker for wheat. You can see massive issues. Uh, Crop failures in 2008, then we see a spike in 2022, and of course that recent spike in wheat prices was because of the invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine, one of the big producers of wheat in the world. And in terms of what worries me about that is that we're now picking up more and more issues about a lot of the grains that are coming from that part of the world where they are having stuck because of the difficulties of actually moving ships across different parts of the world. And some of the cargoes we think now are very heavily contaminated. So particularly with things like mycotoxins, and we get worried about where are those heavily contaminated crops, those food crops, where are they entering into supply chains? I think there is more and more of this likely to happen in the future. And of course, it's not just about Ukraine. We can't really watch any news programs on the TV or social media without seeing global conflicts happening in so many different parts of the world. This is what's called the Global Conflict Tracker. There are currently, according to this database, 29 major conflicts happening in different parts of the world. That's more than any time since the end of the Second World War. And obviously within those countries, within those regions, there will be massive issues about food security and food safety. But also some of those countries are massive exporters or were massive exporters of food. And I think because of the conflicts, it means there's a breakdown in a lot of the surveillance and monitoring systems as well. So these all will constitute to even more challenges in terms of the integrity, the safety, the authenticity of the global food supply system. We also have massive changes in the geopolitics. I'm not sure if you're familiar with BRICS. BRICS started off with Belgium, Russia, India, China, and South Africa coming together as a trading body. And now it's BRICS plus. Many more countries have joining BRICS about driving trade, zero tariff trade. Now BRICS constitutes over 40% of the world's population, but also within the BRICS countries, 60% of all the food produced is within those countries. So you can imagine that's going to have a massive impact in terms of flow of global trade in the future. Very recently, I read this article, A New Food Power is Born. This was published in the China Daily, and it's really talking about the massive changes in trade in food. I mean, China is now the biggest investor, one of the biggest landowners in Africa. And that is really bringing about massive dynamics in terms of the flow of many, many different food commodities across the world. So here we have President Ping and President Trump, and we know there is massive disputes going on now in terms of trade and tariffs. One of my predictions, I actually produced this slide in 2017. That, that is 8 years ago, and I was really predicting that tariffs was going to have a massive impact in terms of not only the flow of trade, but also in driving things like food safety issues and food fraud issues. Just last month, 16th of May, I came across this publication, and it was 4 million onions that had been exported from China, which we believe were destined probably for the United States, but because of the tariffs, they got stuck for a couple of months. And then the owners of this cargo tried to smuggle it into the Philippines. It was actually, the documentation said that it was chicken, but there was a random inspection and it wasn't chicken, it was onions. And upon laboratory investigation, the onions were found to be heavily contaminated with salmonella and heavy metals. So here we can see changes in the trade, changes in tariffs, driving fraud and fraud associated with food safety. In Europe, we now have what's called EUDR, the EU regulations on deforestation, which are amazing, really put in place to try to combat deforestation, particularly in the rainforests. But unfortunately, a lot of regulations will have the intended consequences, but they can also have unintended consequences. And what we're now seeing is massive disruptions in the supply chains of these 5 major commodities. We're seeing much more fraud happening in all of them. And as the legislation is implemented at the end of this year, 2025, we foresee many more problems in the future. I mean, just to give you an example, we all think about Brazil and deforestation and the amount of soya that's produced in Brazil. And we can see that, you know, deforestation is still happening there. But very recently, we've been told that there is growing amount of deforestation, there's a growing amount of fraud in West Africa now in terms of soya. And what's driving a lot of this fraud is the demand of soya from China. And because of the political battles with the United States, China does not want to source soya from the US anymore, and they are driving by various means deforestation in other parts of the world. So we have to be so careful about supply chains, where we think things are coming from and where they actually are coming from. Now, another case study that I would like to give you is mustard. And mustard, it's a spice that many of us consume in many different types of foodstuffs. But quite recently in the UK, one of the world's big supply chains, Domino's Pizza, I saw on television that because of undeclared peanuts in some of their dips, their mustard dips, they were having huge withdrawals of products from the marketplace. And this expanded to other companies like the retailer Iceland and the retailer Waitrose. And then the question, how did peanuts get into mustard? This is surely something really very strange. The actual incident was tracked to a company in England itself, and the investigations were really looking at, was it a mistake or was it deliberate? Was this fraud that was happening, or was it some mistake that had happened along the supply chains? Now, ultimately, you can say it doesn't matter, because peanuts getting into mustard is a huge food risk in terms of people who suffer from allergies. There has been reported cases of anaphylactic shock because of this contamination. But what it seems to me, from as much evidence that I can get, is this is about change in agricultural practices, being driven by, believe it or not, shortages of fertilizers. And instead of using fertilizers, some farmers decided to plant co-crop things like peanuts, which actually can put nitrogen into soil. And then there was some cross-contamination across some supply chains. So it was a mistake, but it just shows if you really don't understand your supply chains and check your supply chains, the potential consequences. Now, I'll come back to mustard a little bit later on, because that's one example of a food safety incident which happened. And I wrote an article for New Food magazine. I write lots of articles for New Food, and they challenged me to write about what I thought were the 5 grand challenges to future food safety. So what are those challenges? And the first, I will repeat, is about our changing climate having dramatic impacts in terms of growing food safety risks. We also have potential issues about emerging foodborne viruses. And I've said many times, I think we were very, very lucky about COVID-19. It caused massive disruption, huge amount of deaths. But if it had been a foodborne virus, things would have been substantially worse. The third challenge is the rise of problems in terms of antimicrobial resistance, and that is the use and misuse of antibiotics, not only in human medicine, but also in livestock production. Challenge number 4 is the economic crisis. I mean, we have a global economic crisis, and what that global economic crisis is doing, some people are taking shortcuts. There is food entering into the markets, which I think is unfit for human consumption. And the 5th one is the whole drive towards a sustainable food system. I'm very much in favour of sustainability, but I think sometimes people are thinking about the sustainability and much less about the changes that they want to impact on the food system, without thinking about the consequences about food safety and fraud. And the introduction of allergens, more allergens into the food system, of new allergens, I think is very much a ticking time bomb. We're going to see many, many more issues about food allergies in the future. Now, that was my 5 risks. If I was allowed to write a 6th one, it would be the growing information there is about the impact of micro and nano particles in our food, particularly derived from plastics. Lots of evidence to show how that these particles can cause inflammation, how they can be linked to various diseases. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we will see much more evidence about the impact of our polluted planet has in terms of food safety. Well, I think I've probably given you enough information now to make you lose some sleep tonight. So many problems, but of course there are solutions. And I'm a researcher in food safety, in food authenticity, and I know there is a huge amount going on in terms of using science, technology, and innovation to combat a lot of those challenges that I talked about. And this now brings me to the title of the lecture, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And we are really now into the digital era of transformation. The digitization of food systems, the capture of information is enormous. Quite recently, I attended an amazing lecture about artificial intelligence, and the professor of AI who was giving the presentation, he said, 90% of all of the data generated in the history of the world has been generated or was generated in the last 3 years. And then he said an equal amount of data will probably be generated within the next 12 months. So we are generating huge, massive data sets. And in terms of the food system, this is really where we can think about the capture and analysis of data, and using the IoT approach, the Internet of Things, where we have interconnected devices and systems which can measure things in real time, collect that data, analyze that data, and we can get instant information. And I truly believe that this will bring about a paradigm shift in the traceability and transparency across the world's supply chains, and that includes food. Huge amount going on in terms of the digitization of supply chains. So it is very much about that huge amount of data that's being generated. How do we generate it? How do we actually analyze that data? And then how do we respond to it? And I'm going to give you just a little bit of information about some of the initiatives that I've been involved in terms of thinking through, collect, analyze, and respond. So the idea, the vision that I had about really thinking about new ways to ensure that food is safe and authentic was using an IoT approach. And the IoT approach was about using low-cost handheld testing devices, scanners, which can scan the samples, which will produce a fingerprint, a physiochemical fingerprint, which can be subjected then to what we call chemometrics, which is really a form of statistics, advanced statistics, statistical analysis of physiochemical data. Then applying different forms of artificial intelligence to that data, particularly machine learning, and putting all of these fingerprints, these AI generated fingerprints into cloud-based systems where they can be accessed remotely through your smartphone, and we can do testing in real time right across food supply systems. So I say this you can say was the vision that I had quite a few years ago. And what we've really now done is we're delivering on this. What you can see is the approach of being analytical. We have a range of different types of handheld scanners. A lot of them are based on molecular spectroscopy. This one is an NIR scanner. So you can scan your food. That scan will go to our models, our chemometric models, which are based in the cloud. And within just a few seconds, the result of that analysis will come back to your smartphone, and you will get an instantaneous result in terms of the quality of that particular type of food. You'll get information about the authenticity and sometimes the safety as well. So this is really revolutionizing how you can do analysis across complicated supply chains. Now, supply chains are very, very complicated. This is a very, very simplistic overview, but you've got those people who produce the food, manufacture the food, distribute and sell it. And across these supply chains, there are what we call nodes. And these are the nodes where things can actually go wrong. They can go wrong accidentally, they can go wrong deliberately. But can you imagine taking scans of food commodities or food ingredients as they pass across the supply chains, particularly at these nodes where you can have a lot of problems? Those digital fingerprints can be uploaded into digital traceability systems, so you can track and trace many, many different food commodities, ingredients right across these complex supply chains. Real innovation. And we're working on many, many different types of foods and commodities at the moment. It can be herbs, spices, meat, rice, fish, coffee. We're working on cocoa. So we're working on multiple supply chains, looking at mapping the supply chains, looking at the nodes where most of the problems may happen, and then we're introducing this instantaneous testing along the supply chains. So again, it's really about identifying problems long before people consume them, long before they get into complex foods, the ready meals, the foods that we buy from restaurants and cafes. So this is a really very, very different concept into terms of mitigating the risks that food businesses have in terms of accidental and deliberate contamination. Now, back to mustard. Now, what I told you was the mustard had been contaminated with peanuts. And actually, the level of peanuts was quite low, but it was still at a high enough level to trigger anaphylactic shock in those people who suffer from allergies to peanuts. And what we did was, after this particular crisis happened just a few months ago, we were able to obtain quite a lot of mustard samples that had been manufactured to go into these types of dips. We produced the spectroscopic fingerprints that I told you about using a particular type of molecular spectroscopy. Those were scanned and we came up with this type of pattern. Now, if you look at all of the blue dots there, all of the blue dots were samples of the mustard where there was no information, no evidence that they had been cross-contaminated with the peanut. Now, the two red samples, the two red dots, were actually two of the contaminated samples that had caused the major issues in terms of the contamination in the UK. Now, from this quite simple graph, you can see that the fingerprint was very, very different than all of the non-contaminated materials. Now, what we describe this as a model where we're looking for unknowns. We don't know what might be in the samples, but when we can build up the spectral fingerprint, if the sample that we test does not fit inside that model, we know there is a problem. And the problem, if we get a problem like this, it's an automatic indicator to stop. Do not put that batch of material into supply chains. Stop it, hold it, test it, find out what the problem is. And of course, in the world of AI and machine learning, now our databases are very aware that that spectral fingerprint that was produced in those two contaminated samples was mustard. And the next time the database would see that, it will flag it up. It's not only contaminated, but it will give us a very good indication of what the contaminant is. So these systems are constantly getting smarter and smarter. The more data we put into the systems, the more information that we can extract from them. So I think hopefully just a nice example of how very simple scanning technique can produce really very, very important results. And often when I deal with quite a number of companies who get embroiled in some sort of crisis, some sort of scandal, often because of contamination. Quite frequently, the contamination did not happen within their business. It happened somewhere else in the supply chain, but they end up having massive issues about financial losses, potentially legal action taken against them by regulators and by people suing the companies. And it is, financially a disaster for so many companies. And as I talk to them about the measures that they have in place, often I will see nice checklists where they will say, yes, we've done this and done this and done this. They really hadn't thought about this, checking and monitoring the most important ingredients, the most important commodities, to ensure that when they used them, that they were both safe and authentic. And it's often, I'll show people the technology and they said, if only we knew about this, we would have been using in our supply chains. But I also talk to many companies who are being very proactive long before they've got any problems. They are starting to adopt the scanning technology. Now, the next innovation I would really like to talk to you about in terms of the fourth industrial revolution is data fusion. And again, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with data fusion, but it's really taking data from different sources, combining that data together to provide a more accurate, a more consistent result. And you can answer not only a single question, but when you undertake data fusion, you can often answer multiple questions. Well, the data can come from many, many different sources. It can be from two different analytical tests, or it can come from the same scientific instruments, but the instruments have been used in a very, very different way. And we are really putting a lot of our efforts into data fusion projects now. I thought I would give you just one example, and that was in seafood. Now, seafood, one of my very great PhD students, Sophie, wrote her PhD thesis, and it was called The 11 Sins of Seafood. There are 11 different ways that fraud can be conducted in seafood, and some of those have got major food safety implications. In this particular study, we were looking at salmon, one of the most popular seafoods in the world. People think of it as being healthy, very nutritious, but often when we go and we buy our seafood, particularly salmon, we want to know, where was the salmon produced? How was it produced? Is it from the wild, or is it farm salmon? Did it come from a part of the world where you might get contaminated waters? And so there is a huge amount of fraud happens in salmon. So what we set out to do was look at, can we use data fusion to really answer the questions about, where did the salmon come from and how was it produced? Now, in terms of data fusion, you can do it in three different ways. The first form of data fusion is just taking the raw data from your two different data sets and combining it, and then doing your artificial intelligence, AI, on that. And the second is where you actually extract some of the data, some modified data, some that has been processed, and then you fuse that. And then high level data fusion is really where you're taking the results of two different analytical tests and you're combining those. Now, the reason I tell you about low, mid, and high level data fusion is you cannot be sure which is the best approach. And often what we do is we apply many different forms of machine learning and the three different forms of data fusion to find out which actually works best. Now, an example of that is when we were examining the authenticity of salmon. We combined data from two very, very different forms of mass spectrometry. One was ICP-MS, where we measured the elemental profile in the salmon samples, and the other was using what's called REAMS technology, REAMS is mass spectrometry, which produces lipidomic profiles. So we measure the lipid profiles. So we have the elements and we have the lipids. And then what we did with those two techniques is we took the data from the REAMS and the ICP-MS, and we looked at various forms of machine learning, various forms of data fusion to see which gave us the best result. Now, in some of the cases where we tried to apply machine learning and data fusion, actually the data did not improve. Some cases it actually got worse. But what we did end up with is a procedure using data fusion and multivariate analysis on the salmon, which actually gave us a 100% level of accuracy. And that's very, very difficult to claim in terms of food authenticity. This study we published just a couple of years ago in Nature Communications, accessed over 9,000 times, and many people are now thinking about, my goodness, data fusion is an amazing way to really drive the accuracy and the reliability of data that's being produced. So coming to an end quite soon, and a lot of what I've been talking about is really trying to understand what happens across complex supply chains, trying to get that transparency. Where did it come from? How was it produced? Is it safe? Is it authentic? And the more transparency that we can get, the much more likely is that food that is sold to people will be safe and authentic. And the very last type of fusion, the very last type of data fusion I'm going to tell you about is actually taking data from multiple sources and fusing it together. And we have four different companies. Be Analytical that I told you about, we do that nice scanning. We're working with a digital supply chain company called Foods Connected, who have got amazing software that they can digitize food supply chains. We work with Agrano, which is a Greek company which uses machine learning in terms of doing what's called predictive analytics. So that predictive analytics can actually tell businesses what your problems are likely to be, not only now, but in the weeks and months to come. And then we've got the fourth company, Aratane, which uses really, really sophisticated laboratory techniques in terms of tracking and tracing the origins of food. So here we have four completely different data sources, and we're fusing this data together to try to give a complete, a very holistic overview of the integrity of supply chains. We are tracking and tracing so many things. And one of the big projects we're working on at the moment is in soya. And we can not only tell what country the soya came from, we can tell the region that the soya came from, and we can actually tell if it came from land that was deforested. So really lots and lots of opportunities in terms of thinking about capturing large data sources, combining it together, fusing it together to provide amazing information both to food businesses and also to regulators. So I'm going to stop talking now. I've been talking for nearly 40 minutes, and I think that was the time that Alina gave me. But really, to summarize, the fourth industrial revolution, it's here, it's now, and it is about thinking about the different ways that we can capture data, how we can interrogate that data, how we can analyze that data, and how we can use that data across really complex supply chains to very quickly identify those problems, find out how the problems happened before anybody is exposed to food that may not be safe, may not be authentic. So I think, fourth industrial revolution, it's going to be massive as we go forward. Our food system is full of challenges, but I think science and technology is going to provide a lot of the solutions. So with that, I will stop talking now and I'll hand you back to Alina.
Thank you so much, Chris. And that was really amazing presentation. Thank you for so much data and so much information. I'm looking forward to see reactions from our attendees who will grant you 100,000 of hearts and claps because Chris now switched off his slides sharing so he can see now all the hearts and all the appreciation from you guys.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, it was amazing. You see now. Yeah, and right now it's time for questions. If you don't mind, Chris, and if you don't mind, guys, I will start first because I'm really curious what's actually, on your opinion, Chris, which technology or innovation do you believe had the most impact so far in improving global food security?
So the big innovations really, and I mean, I spent an amazing week 2 weeks ago with the United Nations, and it was the whole concept of digitizing supply chains, capturing the information, and then sharing that information, sharing it between different businesses, sharing it with regulators. And that is, we will get very, very early warnings, very early indicators where there might be problems, particularly food safety problems, and actually doing something about it before people are exposed to those risks. So digitization, I think 5 years, 10 years, the whole food system will be pretty much digitized. There is going to be massive economic savings as well, because if you really understand your supply chains, if they're fully digitized, you will see where you can save money, you can see where you can reduce waste. So it'll be a big, big plus, a big bonus for everybody, the win-win.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And plus, actually, next webinar will be about AI specifically. We will talk about it with Bruno Sekit. So, guys, if you are interested in this technology, please subscribe to our next webinar as well. And yeah, technology is actually crazy. And in terms of regulation, um, what kind of international cooperation or regulation is most needed to address fraud in global food supply chains?
So regulation about fraud is very, very far behind food safety regulation. It's actually much more difficult to regulate for. What is accidental contamination? What is deliberate adulteration? It's really, really quite tricky. Now, I think we've got some of the really important bodies. Codex are working very hard on getting definitions. There's a lot of efforts in terms of providing regulations about food fraud as well. But often it's sometimes left to businesses to make their own decisions about what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And I've seen a lot of companies get into a lot of problems if they think, let's say, the horse meat scandal, the company was meant to be buying Irish or British meat, and they decided actually the meat from Poland was a little bit cheaper, so we will buy that. What they didn't know was they were exposing themselves to criminal elements in supply chains. So knowing what you buy, where you buy it from is incredibly important.
Yeah, definitely. And if we continue this topic of food fraud, what is your personal assessment of the European deforestation regulation in the context of food fraud and traceability?
So I tell you, I'm a very big supporter of EUDR because I think it's so important, because really it's probably the biggest initiative anywhere in the world to try to combat deforestation. And for those of you who aren't aware, EUDR means that from next year, you are not permitted to sell anything linked to deforestation or buy anything linked to deforestation. You're liable for prosecution, very serious fines, if you're found to be doing that. So it's very positive. Unfortunately, like a lot of regulations, people will look to cheat. So it will be particularly, let's say, the country of origin. You might think your soya, your cacao, your coffee is coming from one particular area which isn't prone to deforestation, but you may well be sourcing something that has been smuggled from one country into another country to evade detection. And there's a lot of that happening. I see palm oil supply chains, there's a lot of cheating going on there. Soya, there's a lot of cheating going on. So just be very, very aware. If you think you're buying something from one geographic region, my goodness, you need to be absolutely sure. Don't believe what's written on the certificate.
Thank you so much, Chris. Extremely critical, but super into the point thought. Next question. When data collection is amalgamated between systems, how will we know that the data is authentic and not manipulated? Do you think this will be a challenge in the future?
Yes, the source of the data, the quality of the data is very, very important. And I always say we have to put enough gates in place to, first of all, make sure the data is of high enough quality. And also the authenticity of the data is very important as well. So, and again, I'm sure many of us have heard about blockchain systems as well. Now, blockchain is wonderful, digitization is wonderful. Just because data is loaded onto a blockchain system does not mean that it is high quality and authentic. So you've got to be very sure of your data sources. You've got to be sure about the quality. Has it been quality assessed before you would even think about using that data by itself or fusing it?
Yeah, and I actually wanted also to touch this topic of data fusion, what you mentioned. Uh, in your opinion, which level of data fusion, low, middle, high, offers the most practical value in today's food industry?
So for data fusion, we've been doing a lot of work with lots of different commodities. And I will tell you, Alina, sometimes the low level data fusion gives us the best result. Sometimes it's the mid level, sometimes it's a high level. Do not assume because high level sounds better, it might be the right solution. So it's like machine learning as well. It's like AI. It's all about algorithms, and you have to check and test as many of these algorithms as you possibly can. So we see really we look at lots of different machine learning models, and we look at the three forms of data fusion, and you have to check that and you have to validate that just to see which performs best.
Yeah, and other maybe like some real world examples you can share on how data fusion is currently being applied in food safety monitoring.
Well, I can give you some of the projects that we're working on at the moment. One of our studies is looking at fraud in tea, actually, believe it or not. And tea is the world's most widely consumed beverage. Okay, so
Yeah.
we drink water, and then we drink tea, and then we drink coffee. Now, we will pay a lot of money for our tea depending on the variety of tea, depending where the tea was produced. So if it was Assam tea or Darjeeling tea, we will pay more for that. But again, we were told actually by a lot of people in the industry that there was a lot of fraud happening. So again, we collected lots of different tea samples. We analyzed the tea in many different ways to look at to see which was the best technique. But what we have found, it's actually the combination of two different techniques, actually using the elements that are present, using the near infrared spectroscopic measurements, combining those together, and whoa, you can get amazing authenticity testing for tea. And just to tell you, when we went out into the market and tested a lot of tea samples, there's a lot of fraud, a lot.
Yeah, and how do you in general address the data integrity and accuracy when fusing data from different technologies or sources?
Yeah. So for that study in tea is a good example. We partnered with a lot of different tea companies, and what they were able to do, they could go right back to the source, go right back to where the tea was being farmed, take the samples for us. Not only would they take the samples, we could get GIS data from where the samples were being taken themselves. So we were absolutely sure the samples that we were generating the data were genuine. And then what we will do is you will build and develop your models, your machine learning models. Then what we will do is we call it cross validation. So we will take some what we call unknown samples, put them into the model to see if they produce the right result or not. And then we will go out to the marketplace and then we will do the testing, knowing that our tests have been very well validated.
Thank you so much. And if we look ahead, what is the biggest obstacle to fully leverage the fourth industrial revolution in global food systems, on your opinion?
Okay, so there will always need to for companies to think about we've got to do something very different and food industry tends not to want to change its systems too much because there is a cost involved, there is investment. So I think it's about deciding, producing that business plan to say we're going to invest in digitization, we're going to invest in this type of Internet of Things approach. Not only is it about protecting the reputation of our business, but we can find out so much additional information. We can reduce our waste. We can transfer things, transport things much, much better, more efficiently. And a lot of the businesses I work with, they see so many benefits when they have digitized. It's not just about stopping fraud. You'll get a multitude of other benefits.
Yeah, and as far as I don't see any more question, I would ask you to give your personal like a closing remark advice to researchers or industry leaders aiming to drive innovation in general in food safety. What it would be about?
Okay, so I think maybe first of all to people in industry, uh, it's a very difficult marketplace. Um, there are so many different challenges, supply chain disruptions, price increases, and sometimes it's very difficult to deal with anything else apart from the problems that you're facing now. And a lot of the businesses that I work with, we're really thinking about how to overcome those problems, not in the short term, but the medium to long term. And food businesses will move towards digitization. They will move towards this type of testing, this Internet of Things approach that I talked about. If you sit back and don't do it, you will find you will be at a commercial disadvantage very soon because your competitors will have digitized. And then to researchers, it's a wonderful era. The wonderful era about data. We have so much data being generated. Think about how can I start to capture that data? How can I start to really exploit and analyze that data using some of the approaches that I talked about? The application of machine learning, the application of data fusion. And I see, I mean, I'm co-editor in chief of Nature Science of Food. I see more and more scientific publications on analytical chemistry, which are using chemometrics, which are using machine learning, and now data fusion is starting to come again. So think about if you want to publish in really good scientific journals, think about the unbelievable opportunity you have to exploit data.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I'm a big fan actually of data, of digitalization, and that's something that I really love using in my daily routine. And that's actually a good reference to our next webinar about AI, and I do encourage everyone to register to it as well. Thank you, Chris. Huge thanks for
Very
having
welcome.
you today, for pitching to us. I do encourage everyone, please share more hearts, claps, your warmest thanks to Chris for his time and his valuable data sharing as well. And I wish to everyone who has just the beginning of the day, amazing day, and easygoing and just joyful time at work, vacation, whenever you are. And to everyone who is at the end of the working day to have restful evening. See you at the next academy. Bye bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.